Hi, I'm Peter Guber, and this is Winning Voices. In my career in movies, television, sports, new media, entrepreneurism, and academia, I've had the opportunity to meet the best and the brightest, the leaders in all those fields. And what I found they all had in common was their ability to tell a purposeful story to win. I want to share those voices with you so that you can tell to win. Tony Robbins was a personal friend of mine for decades, and I have seen him inspire and ignite success by using the power of story and by decoding people's story to create what's standing in the way of them being successful. He's here today to share that success and to share that tool with you and with me. Tony, you've had this amazing power, not just to make people think, but to feel. Where did you get this, and when did you know you had this unique resource and talent?
I think everybody has the ability to feel, right? You know, that wasn't a great gift. I think I just feel so much, and I feel so much what people feel. When my youngest son, I remember when I was really young even, came in and he'd bring his friends and go, watch my dad watch this movie, and I'd be like, don't open the door. I just can't help myself. I feel what they feel. And so that produced a lot of drive in me to help people when they're in pain, because I feel their pain.
You specialize in a lot of different areas: health, business, politics, sports, all kinds of areas. Of all the areas, what's the most challenging to move people to be active in their own rescue?
It's really intimate love and romance, because you can control your business to some extent because you can control you. You can control your finances to some extent, right, by your choices. But you can do everything you want to do in an intimate relationship, and it can still blow up in your face because you can't control another human being, and if you could, you'd have no relationship. So, and I also think that if there's a story that all human beings have, it's the story of fear. It really comes down to a fear that we're not enough. So getting people to have the courage and the faith to realize there is no security in life and there's no security in relationship. There's only what you can contribute. When somebody's in love, what's wrong with your life? Nothing. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Doesn't matter. You're silly as hell. But when they don't have that love in their life and everything else is going well, they still come to that empty place inside at the end. And that's the place where the most successful people on earth that have been clients of mine, everybody thinks is so incredible. That's where they're lonely still very often. And that's the area that you got to really dig in to help someone.
Do they usually have a story that happened to them very young, which is kind of a backstory or a seminal element that is still present in them 10, 20, 30 years later and preventing them from exercising those talents?
I always say, change your story, change your life. Because whatever your story is becomes the shaper of all your perceptions, what you're going to try or not try, do or not do. The problem is most people are so addicted to telling that same story over and over again, it does become their prison. There's a stage in your life where you could yell, scream, throw stuff, smack people, and suddenly somebody yells at you or hits you, or even worse, ignores you. Right. And that's the moment when the ultimate story is, what do I do to get that attention back? What do I do to get that love? And so some people, they suddenly try to crawl or walk, and everybody goes, look, Johnny's walking, and the story is, I'm an achiever. I do things so I'm significant enough to get attention and love. Some people break stuff and people come, and they learn, if I destroy stuff, that's my story, then I'll get unconsciously this love. Some people, they go, they make some noise and everybody laughs, make some noise, and a comedian's born. I'm oversimplifying it, but if we can go back and reclaim who we are today instead of living an old story, everything in your life changes, and that's a part of what I do.
I recall the President of the United States calling you. Remember, you were going to see Princess Diana, Mikhail Gorbachev. All these people are extremely successful, extremely talented. Did they all have backstories that ran them? Did they all have some element in them, despite their success, that was still in the back of their head, still telling them, you're not good enough, you are good enough, or some element of their life that wasn't working because of that?
Everybody's got parts of their life that shape the way they look at today and how they behave today. Everybody does. Everybody has a backstory, multiple backstories. The question is, which one's running you now? But what I'd say the common backstory for the successful people is hunger. Something produced drive in them. If you say, what's the difference in human beings and how they perform and how they show up, it's not intelligence or ability. You can find somebody with plenty of intelligence and ability and they don't maximize. They can't fight their way out of a paper bag. Right. And then you find this other person that finds this hunger inside. You have it, I have it, almost anyone we know who has done something they're proud of in their life or they feel good about in their life, they had to get through all the obstacles. They had to get through their own limiting stories. And so there had to be something they wanted more. That hunger often comes from a story of frustration or pain or desire. And finding that touchstone and igniting it is how you often can take somebody who's not driven and hungry and really help them to change their life.
Do you think that people are empowered when they hear that somebody of that high stature also has some of those same problems and some of those backstories that are handicapping them?
It's a great question. Some people are. Some people use it as a reason to hang on to their old story.
Ooh, very cool.
Right? Because they go, well, if Bill Clinton has that experience,
Right.
if Tony Robbins has that experience, then what the heck am I going to do? And that's part of the challenges. It's like I remember one time, it was fascinating. My own sister, something was going on. It was challenging and everything else. And I said, how come you didn't call me? And she goes, well, because you're Tony Robbins. I'm like, what does that mean? She goes, well, you can handle it. If you start thinking that everybody's messed up, then it gives you an excuse to stay messed up. Versus my view is, let me tell you what these people overcame to be where they are. Right. That's what I'm more interested in, so that you and I have something to aspire to. Because stories will either give you some form of aspiration, some inspiration, or they give you an excuse to stay where you are, or even make it worse.
Was there anything that you were insecure about when you were growing up that you felt, oh my God, this could cripple me, or it was something that you really had to overcome?
How many of the one things you want? I had so many fears. I mean, I had minestrone soup acne on my face in high school. I didn't feel attractive. I was 5'1" my sophomore year in high school.
That's a scary thought.
Isn't it?
That's a scary thought.
I grew 10 inches in a year.
Well, the next guy that met you a year later, that's a scary thought too.
Well, what's a scary thought? I was with you when I found out, I had a tumor that made me grow like that, and I had no idea. So, you go from 5'1" to 6 foot, 6'2", now 6'7". People say, what's the difference? I always say personal growth, right? But I had a mouth on me, wouldn't take it, but I was slow and not that strong. I had a good combination, right? But I overcame it mostly by saying, in the end, if I find a way to add enough value to somebody else's life and I'm totally sincere and raw, they may doubt it all they want, but if I do that for year after year, decade after decade, eventually I'm going to get through to them.
Well, as a storyteller, one of the magic things that I watched you in the audience that I learned from you was that you're a great story listener. In other words, the idea is that you don't just hear people, you get people. And when people feel that they're gotten, that they're really heard in that unique way, empathetically, they engage in a different way.
Yeah.
Is that a talent that you learned, or you just felt you had, or did you really work on it, or was it something that you perceived? And how important is that skill in creating a relationship that is successful?
Communication is hearing what's not being said. And if you don't have that and all you do is take the words, you're going to have a disastrous intimate relationship. You're going to probably have some really disastrous business relationships because most people don't speak what they're really feeling or saying. Most of the time they're either scared to, afraid to, or they're hiding their agenda because they have another agenda. The listening part is better than the storytelling part. You can entertain people as a storyteller, but you can transform people if you can really understand what their needs are, listen, and sometimes just by listening alone, people's lives can change.
When you're on stage, or when you're coaching people directly, how important is it to really be interested in who you're talking with, as opposed to being interesting?
We all know that if you're interesting, you might have a relationship that's on the surface, but if you're interested, you're going to go deep. Your whole thesis in life is understanding that the story is what drives everything in life. It's what drives the influence of another human being. But the understanding of that person's story is more important than your ability to formulate your story. That's why I think in your book, one of the most valuable things, Peter, is the backstory. Right. Because sometimes you can find that backstory in advance, sometimes you can't.
Right.
But if you're watching and listening and asking questions, the backstory will show up right in front of your eyes if you're engaged with that person.
When you see somebody telling their story and you're decoding it, or they're a business person, if they're not authentic, does it shine through no matter what they say?
Well, I'd love to say yes, but I know I've gotten the wool pulled over my eyes, so that would be a lie. Wow. But I would say most of the time at this stage of my life, I'm pretty good at that. And I think most of us are.
You're an authentic son of a bitch. I love you. Thanks a lot.
Most people know the level of success you've achieved. I mean, 52 Academy Award nominations, one of the youngest guys to run a studio, running Sony, Polygram, your television shows, how many years? 25 years now, 30 years at UCLA as a professor. I mean, did you really need another day job? What the heck would inspire you to take on the intensity of writing this book at this time? You know, Tell to Win. Why did you really want to take story and get people to understand its impact in business and in life?
What really happened is I was a storyteller in movies and television, as you said, in sports. I was a storyteller. That was my craft. And then I realized I had success and I had failure. And I wondered, why did I succeed more than I failed, and why did I have more joy, less pain? And I realized one of the secrets that I had, one of the talents that I had, is when I told a purposeful story, when I was telling the story correctly, it was a powerful tool to engage others for success and for my success as well as their success. And so it's really a story that emotionalizes the information rather than doing data, facts, information, which I did all my life. Here are the facts, here's the data, fire all those bullet points. It worked. It didn't really work because I was aiming at their wallet or their feet or their head. This is where hits are born, right here. So when I used story, it metabolized all those things. They remembered it. Emotion bonded with information becomes memorable, resonant, and actionable. When I saw that, I realized it was no secret. Everybody had it. Yeah. And so my job was not to give something to you or you or you or you, but to shine the light on something they had and say, these are the tools that you can use to extract that and use it for your success. And so that's why I did it.
What makes the difference? Give me 3 things that make a difference between a story that just gets told and a story that actually touches that harder soul, moves someone to action, creates a real change.
One thing is, you don't go tell a purposeful story unless you have a goal. What's your goal? They are transporting all the information. What is the goal? And when you hide the goal, you say, I won't show them the goal. You were talking about this before. I'll keep it, my agenda private. They get that. Your authenticity.
They don't trust you.
They don't trust you.
Yeah.
And trust comes as the formation of a relationship, which comes before transaction, before you can get them to move their feet or their wallet. If you come in and think of these people as customers, clients, and patrons, they protect their groin, they protect their wallet. And if you think of them as an audience and you render an experience to them, they open up their heart. It's not wrong to have a desire to have the person transact with you. Your question is, what's the tool of purpose? If you're going to use a story, telling a purposeful story to move them to transact with you, you have to have an emotional story. You have to have something that gets them emotionally, because they're not going to metabolize it. They're not going to act on it. And if they don't trust you, they're not going to really hear you, or as you use your expression, get you.
So you're saying that before I'm even worrying about the story, what I got to worry about is how am I going to serve them and me? Obviously, I got to serve myself also here if I'm going to be in business.
That's not wrong.
Right, it's not wrong.
The key is, it's telling a purposeful story. There are 4 or 5 elements in the tell, before you even get to the story, that make the story powered.
Could tell me what those are.
You've got to have your own intention correct.
Okay, we got that.
You got to be authentic.
Got it.
What yours. You got to be interested rather than trying to be interesting.
Got it.
You got to have a goal that's generous. There's got to be really generosity in the goal.
Love that.
All right? You got to be interactive when you engage. It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. You got to leave room for them to own it. You can't make them own it. They've got to move forward to own it. Your job is to give them proprietorship over the story so it's theirs. And when that happens, they become an advocate and an apostle for their story and your product.
Right. A story you're retelling can be powerful, but a story you've experienced comes alive, right? Because you don't have to, you're not processing something intellectually, it's in your nervous system, especially if it's one that got emotion in you. Am I right about that, or how would you describe it?
The primary source of a great story is your experience, because then you're sharing an experience in the form of that narrative.
Right.
You're sharing something emotional to you. It has a value proposition, and somebody says, it feels credible.
How important is this backstory understanding, knowing the story that might be filtering the way they perceive you or your offering or this moment? How important is the backstory, and how do you find the backstory on someone so you don't walk in and stick your foot deeply in your mouth or some other particular orifice? Right?
Well, you get 2 backstories. You got yours and you got theirs. You better know your own.
Good point.
Because it can hijack you in lying in your weeds.
Give me an example of one of those.
Well, I was a young boy, and when I was 12, 11, 10, I had an experience with an authority. I was being thrown out of school, and I ran in to tell my parents that this headmaster was telling a bunch of baloney. That wasn't what happened. And I walked in, and he was filled with badges, and all the headmaster had on was a Scout's uniform with a tremendous amount of authority. And I choked up, all my sphincters closed up, and I ran out and let his story be mine. And I was thrown out of school.
Meaning you just accepted, you didn't tell people that it was not true.
And 35 years later, I walked into the King of Thailand's palace and preparing a story about piracy. and there was a whole group of people there. I didn't know who was who, and I saw the king. Oh my God, he has all these white badges, all these uniforms on, and I shrunk back. I was freaked out. I said, oh my God, that backstory reared up its head.
Wow.
Yeah. Instead, I pushed through it. I really did.
You did?
Yeah, we were really smart. I pushed through it. I said, I'm not going to be sucked in this time. I'm going to do it. So I went there, and I told him the whole story about a beautiful musician who lost his whole life and all of his earnings because his properties, intellectual properties, had been stolen. And I had done my wisdom on his backstory. I didn't know at that time that it was a backstory, that he was a musician. And I said to him, you know, you're a musician. This should feel the same way to you.
So that he'd want to do something about it.
Empathetic. He said, yeah. And as I was telling the story, Ogasan came over to me and tried to grab my arm. He pulled me away.
He was the head of Sony, right?
Yeah,
Ogasan.
yeah. He was the head of Sony. He was the owner.
Yes.
And he pulled me. I said, no, I'm almost finished. I'm almost finished. He gets it. The king gets it. He said, Guba-san, that's not the king. That's the guard. That's the king over there. So I told the perfect story to the guard. You know, I was so convulsed in getting through my backstory that I lost it. So it can really sabotage you if you're not careful. You know?
You've shared so many stories with me over the years, and there's stories where the pitch that you gave, the presentation you gave, did not work. And you just wouldn't give up. And sometimes it's not just the ability to tell the story, it's the ability to find a way to tell that story in another way. Would you share the story, the example of what you did with Gorillas in the Mist?
And what happened was the chairman of Warner Brothers had decided he wasn't going to make Gorillas in the Mist after going all the way down the road. And I knew if I left that room, even though he was thinking about it, if I left that room, the no became absolute. So I literally decided I'm going to stay in the room. And I took on the role of the gorilla. I laid on the floor, put my arms out, and I said, you're going to let this gorilla die? I talked about the gorilla.
You physically laid on the floor?
I physically laid down on the floor, and I just
What
said,
did he say?
He said, are you crazy? That's what he said. I said, I'm not leaving until you say yes. I said, this is a powerful story that needs to be told, and we've gone all the way down the road, and we can make this thing. We will not have the risks you said. I've shown you that, and I'm determined to live with that, and I'll put my money on the line to prove it.
Is it true that he said, just invited the next guy into the meeting?
Yeah, then he said, okay, I got to have another meeting. He called the secretary.
And you're still on the floor?
Still on the floor, brought him into the room. He sat down. The guy didn't notice me at first, and then he started making his presentation to him, and then he looked over at somebody laying on the floor. He said, who's that? And then Terry said, that's a felled gorilla. He said, a felled gorilla. So then Terry retold the story that I had told him. And in telling it, that story, he kind of owned it. You know, it was a different change. And I said to him, you got to do it. He said, okay, you're going to put your fee up? I said, yeah. He said, okay, we'll do it. Get out. And I ran out the door. And as I ran out the door, I heard the guy say, if I lay on the floor, will you make my movie too? So you never know. You got to be spontaneous.
And that movie, wasn't it not nominated for an Academy Award?
5 Academy Awards.
5 Academy Awards.
And the gorillas are still here, and I am too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, my friend.
Tony makes the case for purposeful storytelling for success. Those people you want to ignite their success and for your own success. Join him in that quest. Look at your own backstory, look at the stories you tell, and tell them purposefully. This is Peter Guber, and thanks for joining Winning Voices.